Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Ryan Pronzinski of Christ Lutheran Church in Michigan Center, Michigan, and this is my Chair Chat daily devotion for Friday, September 11th, 2020. Peace be with you. These video devotions are intended to help you engage your life of faith during this time of pandemic, and so with engagement in mind, I encourage you to leave constructive comments, questions, or prayer requests in the comments section below, and I promise that I will get to these in the following videos. I also encourage you to do this because you can engage with one another in this space. And as I said in yesterday's video, we only retain about 25% of the things that we hear spoken to us, whereas we retain about 90% of what we share back and forth with one another. So please engage with people with these videos. If it's not in this space, do it in some other way. And if you can't engage with somebody, at least try and journal and write things down, because that helps you retain better too. Find meaningful ways to engage with your faith, please, and thank you. This is the teacher in me speaking. The readings that get put forth in these videos every day come from what's called the Daily Revised Common Lectionary, which is a church calendar reading schedule, and it can be found online. As we are in year A of the cycle, the readings for today are as follows, which are in the description below. We have Psalm 103, verses 1 through 13, which I will not be reading today, but for details, please see yesterday, September 10th's video. We also have Genesis chapter 41, verse 53 through chapter 42 through verse 17, which is a continuation from yesterday, and if I were doing a video tomorrow, the Joseph story would continue on into tomorrow as well. We also have Acts chapter 7, verses 9 through 16, which, ironically enough, is basically just saying the Joseph story happened and recalling bits and pieces of it. So that's a little heads up on what's coming up with those readings. But before I get to the two of those and some thoughts, as always, I'd like to invite anybody out there who's watching these videos to come and join us at Christ Lutheran Church to worship with us digitally, because we've been doing live stream worship services with Facebook Live. And the link to those Facebook Live worship services is in the description below. We have our worship services at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays. And you can put in prayer requests in the comments section on Sundays with Facebook Live. Join us if you can. If you can't, please come and just check out the services anyway and hear about how God in Christ Jesus loves you when you can, because they get posted as recorded afterward. And if you happen to be in the Michigan Center area, Jackson area, or even Ann Arbor, Lansing, or whatever you think is close enough to drive this way, we will be having outside worship this Sunday, so please feel free to join us as you're able and feel comfortable doing so. Otherwise, stay at home and view from there. All that being said, we move on to the first reading, which is a continuation of the Joseph story, which comes from Genesis chapter 41, verse 53 through 42, verse 17, and reads as follows. When Jacob, that is Joseph's father, learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? Like, don't stand around here, go do something about it," right? "I have heard," he said, "that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there." Go down as in, Israel is both north of Egypt and generally higher in elevation, so quite literally go down. "Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Side note, Benjamin is the only other child of Rachel, whom Jacob loved like Joseph. And so Jacob doesn't want to lose his only other, he thinks is his only other son from Rachel. So that's why he's holding on to Benjamin. Plus Benjamin's the baby. Anyway, verse 5, "Thus the sons of Israel were among the other people who came to buy grain, for the famine had reached the land of Canaan," or Canaan. Now Joseph was the governor over the land. It was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brother came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said to him, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Although Joseph had recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Joseph also remembered the dreams that he had dreamed about them, and he said to them, "You are spies. You have not come to see you have come to see the nakedness of the land." They said to him, "No, no, my lord. Your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." But Joseph said to them, "No, you have come to see the nakedness of the land." They said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the son of a certain man in the land of Canaan. The youngest, however, is now with our father, and one more is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is just as I have said to you. You are spies. Here is how you shall be tested. As Pharaoh lives, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Let one of you go and bring your brother, while the rest of you remain in prison, in order that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, as Pharaoh lives, surely you are spies." And he put them all together in prison 3 days. So as I read this through the second time, that's the end of the reading, FYI. As I read this through the second time, I realized some of the thoughts I'm about to share about Joseph being forgiving and not holding grudges may not be as apparent in this reading because, he puts his brothers in prison and he's testing them. But I'm keeping the end of the story in mind. I mean, we can see from this reading the power that Joseph did have and how he could have simply left his brothers there. I mean, he could have, dished out the same level of mistreatment his brothers dished out to him very easily, and just kept Benjamin with him too once they brought Benjamin back, his full brother, right, from Rachel, his mother. This is not what Joseph does, though. Getting back to my notes, I know I've been talking a lot about forgiveness this week because that's been kind of the major theme of the week, especially coming up Sunday. I've been saying that every day. But what I think is most fascinating about this text is how everyone is having a similar experience. Everyone is hungry, and there is famine in the land, and there's not enough food to eat. And so their experience of having a collective similar experience is much like our own lives right now, right? For we're living in a pandemic, a situation that is shared literally by every single person around the world. That still blows my mind. There's not a lot of experiences other than like breathing air and bleeding blood, right? That and drinking water that we all share around the world. And so I think we can learn something from this story then with that perspective, that frame in mind, right? The way that the people get through the 7 years of famine that are upcoming, not even the current one, but there's another one coming, right, is by working together and not being afraid to ask for help and relying on outsiders, even foreigners, right? The people of Israel, specifically in this story, Jacob and his 11 sons, rely on the foreign nation of Egypt to get them through this regional famine that everyone is experiencing. Yes, by putting differences aside and looking at the much larger problem of famine and hunger, the people are able to overcome the famine. They don't let pride and individualism get in their way of working together and overcoming the much larger shared problem of famine and hunger. Whereas, right, if they didn't work together, they very well may have had much starvation and death. And so to me that sounds much like our lives today. where we know the science and the data shows this clearly, that if we worked together, taking similar collective steps regularly, like, and this is not exclusive list, this or an exhaustive list, but these types of things, right? Like wearing masks regularly. I remember hearing from one of the, Anthony Fauci or CDC people saying, like, if we wore masks, if 80% of the people wore masks 80% of the time, we would significantly reduce the amount of infections and spread of disease and death by COVID-19. 80% of the people, 80% of the time. So like wearing masks regularly and keeping up our social distancing. It's not an either or, it's in addition to wearing the masks, right? And then also, in addition, making sure that we let people know if we're not feeling well or we've gotten sick, the people that we've been around, like within the last week, like calling them, doing our own contact tracing and isolating, right? Yes, if we took steps like these regularly and collectively, we would be doing much better in ending this pandemic. And yet, we collectively, in a large part of the society, I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying collectively, there is a large segment of people, right, that have this mentality that if we need to ask for help, and if we need to rely on one another to have the best outcome, and if we need to somehow make sacrifices, especially if this means relying on people and making sacrifices for people we don't necessarily agree with and want to work with, right? We can perceive this collective work then as weak or somehow un-American. I should do that for weak too, or somehow wrong, right? So what I find awesome then about this text is that we have a biblical example, a faith-based story that shows us that as people of faith, we can work collectively together and rely even on outsiders and foreigners to help us and still be faithful, right? We can work with people that don't agree with us and still be faithful to who God is and who God is calling us to be. Yes, we don't have to try and do this alone. And we see that true strength, right, that can get people through a 7-year famine. That's incredible. Happens as we work together. And more importantly, we see that God works through this communal approach to getting through hard times, right? Because we would hear at the end of Genesis in chapter 45, which is Saturday's reading, Joseph says that God put him in this situation in Egypt. This is like divinely ordained in order to save all the nations, not just his family and the Israelites, but everyone. Right? God put him in this place to save all the nations from famine, as everyone worked together, right? Because there are no big industrial-sized farms. All the food that came to be stored up for the 7 years of famine during the 7 years of plenty comes from everybody working together. So we need not fear breaking away from this toxic idea that exists in our country of the only way to be truly American, right, is to uphold our individualistic freedoms, even at the expense of others. Because our higher loyalty, if you're out there and you're a person of faith, even if you're not a Christian, but you're a person of faith, our higher loyalty is to God, right? And to our common humanity. For anybody out there that's even just a spiritual person, our higher loyalty than to ourselves is to our common humanity and our common good. For us Christians, it's to God and to Jesus Christ, who is willing to sacrifice everything for everyone else, right? Our higher loyalty is to this God. And God shows us in this story that we ought to work together, because this is who God is and who God has made us to be. And this is how God works. I mean, the very first blessing and promise to the kind of the head, the spark of God's people, right, in Abraham, is God, am going to bless you, Abraham, and everyone that comes after you Not in order that you might just receive a bunch of blessings and feel good about yourself. No, I'm going to bless you to bless other people, period. No qualitative or quantitative put in between that. Like, I'm going to bless you so that you bless certain types of people and under certain situations. No, blanketly, I'm blessing you to bless other people, period. End of discussion. That's this God is who our higher loyalty should be to. Right? God comes, and our faith comes before any type of messaging our country may give us. All right. So all that being said, in what ways are you tempted to focus mostly on yourself and do things on your own during this time of pandemic? In what ways are you wanting to focus primarily on yourself and doing things on your own during this time of pandemic? And how might God want you to focus on other people and work with other people in those ways where you're wanting to focus primarily on yourself and do it on your own? That's plenty to think about. Now, moving on to Acts chapter 7, verses 9 through 16, which reads as follows. The patriarchs, that is, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, jealous, or rather specifically Jacob's sons. So the patriarchs are in fact Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but after Jacob comes Judah and Reuben and Dan and Asher and all the sons, right? So the patriarchs, jealous of Joseph, sold him into Egypt. But God was with him, that is Joseph, and rescued Joseph from all of his afflictions, and enabled him to win favor and to show wisdom when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who appointed him ruler over Egypt and over all his household. Now there came a famine throughout Egypt and Canaan, and great suffering, and our ancestors could not find food. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our ancestors there on their first visit. On the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and Joseph's family became known to Pharaoh. Then Joseph sent and invited his father Jacob and all his relatives to come to him, 75 in all. So Jacob went down to Egypt. He himself died there, as well as our ancestors, and their bodies were brought back to Shechem and laid in the tomb that Abraham had bought for a sum of silver from the sons of Hamor in Shechem. Here ends the reading. Now, I mean, this is pretty much just a rehashing of like today's reading, yesterday's reading, and tomorrow's reading from Genesis. So I guess the only other thing that I would like to say with regard to Joseph and the Joseph story that is incredible to me still, and maybe I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, is that Joseph doesn't hold a grudge against his family. I mean, I can't even fathom my own brothers, my own flesh and blood, firstly wanting to kill me, and then selling me into slavery. I mean, that's insane. Simply because I had some dreams and I shared them with you and you didn't like them. Even if you were the most snarky, snobbish person, that still, you shouldn't kill your brother. I mean, it's insane. Anyway, so he doesn't hold a grudge. Or against anyone else, right, who wronged him along his journey. Because there's a lot of people that do, right? Potiphar's wife, the baker, or maybe it wasn't the baker, was it the wine cup? Yeah, I think it's the baker that lives. The cupbearer dies. Or is it the cupbearer that lives? One of the two of them lives and says they'll tell Pharaoh about him, and they don't, right? All the people that wrong him along the way, Joseph doesn't hold a grudge against them. Instead, Joseph remains faithful to God in God's command and promise to bless others, as I've said earlier, right? Because, right, and Joseph blesses other people because he knows that God promises to do the same for him, and does. God does do that. God lifted him up more than once from the point of death to a position of abundance and power, not for his own sake, but for the sake of all people. And so because God has blessed him in this way, Joseph blesses others, because God promises to bless him through these hardships, right, as God did. And Joseph doesn't use his power as the second in command in the largest nation in the region, right, to withhold food from people as he could have, right? You're spies, go to prison. No one would have thought twice about it, right? He doesn't withhold food from people who have wronged him or falsely accuse those who falsely accused him or forgot about him. Yes, again, his brothers end up in prison, but long term, right? They're freed, given food, given land. I mean, like, there's just an abundance of blessings that comes to his family. No one is punished that punished Joseph, right? Now, as we heard in 1 John chapter 3 yesterday, right, Joseph simply loved the people, all the people. Joseph simply loved the people, whether they were, quote, his people, right, his brothers in Israel, or not. Joseph simply used the gifts and the power that he had been given in order to love the people the way they needed to be loved, right where they were at. And so I hope that this story inspires you to do the same, right? At a time when there is such great division and derision in our country. I hope that you were inspired by Joseph, right? And God, who worked with and through and for Joseph to love people with the power he had in a way, that would bless them as they needed. I hope that you're inspired to do the same, to use the powers you have, the gifts you have, to love people where they're at in a way that they need right now. So that's what I'm going to ask at the end of this section. What gifts has God given you? And how might you share these gifts with someone in need today, or this week, or this month, or the rest of this year? How can you regularly be using the gifts that God has given you to bless other people? I mean, I know I've been giving a lot more to charity this year because I know a lot of people are struggling, both non-for-profits and people out of work, etc. So I've been monetarily giving more than I normally would to try and help people. I mean, shoot, the one fundraiser, I paid $100 for a hoodie, right? I mean, it's a fundraiser, right? It's supposed to go help orphans. And I know it will because I've been to the orphanage. But, what gifts do you have? If it's money, give. There are hungry people. Help the food banks. If it's other things, if you can knit and make gloves and scarves, it's going to be getting cold soon, and people may not be able to afford that stuff. I know we give them away at our pantry all the time. We might be doing that again. Can you make some scarves and gloves and hats and give them away at a food pantry to people that are struggling to be able to buy that stuff, even food? Can you volunteer? Can you give blood? What gifts do you have? What can you do? Can you just call somebody? Listen to them. Pray with them. Right? Share some affirming, hopeful words. Maybe you've been through some hard stuff because you're older and more seasoned in this life, and you can help people that are younger walk through these really uncertain times. I mean, can you imagine right now somebody that's just gotten out of college is looking for work, and then the economy takes a dump. Maybe they've had their first child, and they're struggling to get diapers and formula and food, to find work, to find a home, maybe pay for their home, pay for their debt from school. I mean, there's probably some people that are out there that are really, really stressed right now, and they might be your own neighbors right around you, and maybe they just need somebody to talk to. I don't know. I'm throwing lots of stuff out there. I don't know who all is watching these anymore, but what gifts do you have, and how can you give them in love to other people, regardless of who they are, to try and help them where they're at as they need? Plenty to think about. God bless you as you seek to live this way. And with that, I say to you again, peace be with you, and I will talk to you on Monday.